Most women learn, far too early, that their power must be dimmed to be loved. But some women, very few, never forget the fire they were born with. And it's her that unravels him. Not because she's loud, not because she demands attention, but because she doesn't need it. She's the enigma that doesn't perform. The mirror he never asked for. The silence in which his shadows echo. Carl Jung warned us of this encounter, the moment when a man, gripped by the illusion of control, meets the woman he cannot possess nor predict. And in that collision, something inside him breaks. Not his heart, no. That comes later. First, it's his ego. You see, men are conditioned to respond to patterns. They know the scripts. They know when to flatter, when to dominate, when to disappear. But when a woman walks into his life and doesn't respond to the cues, doesn't need the performance, doesn't react to the testing, he senses it. She's not like the rest. He cannot place her into a box labeled desirable or forgettable. She moves through the world with a kind of sacred indifference. She listens to her own soul. She walks away not to teach a lesson, but because her nervous system demands peace. Her intuition doesn't ask for permission. It simply tells her when something is no longer aligned. This is the woman that men remember in silence. In the middle of the night, when no one is watching, she becomes an obsession not because of what she gave, but because of what she took with her, his reflection. Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine image in the male unconscious. It is not her he longs for. It is the part of himself that she awakens and then withdraws. That's why her absence feels like punishment. That's why his ego begins to twist, burn, fracture. The feminine that doesn't chase evokes panic in the unhealed masculine. It forces him to confront the illusion that he is the center of all orbit. When she does not orbit him, when she chooses herself, he feels dethroned. And it is not rejection that wounds him. It's irrelevance. She doesn't attack his ego. She doesn't shame him. That would be too easy. Instead, she sees through it. That is her gift and her curse. She looks at the man, not the mask. She witnesses the wounds he hides behind charm and certainty, and she doesn't flinch. That kind of presence feels like violence to the part of him that survives on illusion. He may pretend she didn't matter. He may act unaffected. But deep in his psyche, he knows he was seen. And for many men, that is unbearable. Because to be seen is to be known. To be known is to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable without control, that is death to the ego. Have you ever wondered why a man seems more shaken by the woman who walks away gently, without drama, than by the one who screams at his silence? Because drama confirms he still holds power. Her quiet exit confirms he never did. She's not angry. She's just done. And done is something he can't argue with. There's no debate, no chance to reassert dominance, just an empty space where his importance used to be. Some women love with attachment. She loves with presence. And when presence is no longer safe, she disappears, not to punish, but to preserve. He may say she's too intense, too spiritual, too much. But in truth, she is simply too awake for a man who lives asleep in his own projections. She triggers the part of him that knows he is not whole. She brings to the surface the boy who never received unconditional regard, the man who covers his insecurities with performance, and when she does not applaud the act, he feels exposed. That is not cruelty. That is alchemy. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that is what this woman does. She makes him conscious. But here is the irony. She never meant to change him. She never asked to be the mirror. She only wanted to exist freely in her truth, to walk without pretending. And it is that very freedom that disturbs the carefully built illusions around him. She doesn't try to fix. She doesn't try to please. She doesn't try to heal the man who cannot hold himself. And because she does not play the role of the rescuer, the nurturer, the one who bends, she becomes dangerous, not to him, to his ego. And the ego always fights what it cannot control. There is something unnerving about a woman who no longer reacts, not because she's cold, but because she has learned to hold her center in the face of chaos. And this, to the fragmented masculine, feels like betrayal. In a world where men are taught to equate emotional withdrawal with power, her stillness isn't passive, it is defiant. She is not using silence to manipulate. She is using it to protect, not as a game, but as a boundary, and he cannot win against a boundary born from self-respect. This is where his ego starts to spiral. The ego thrives in performance. It wants an audience. It feeds off attention, reaction, validation. And when he meets a woman who offers none, not because she withholds, but because she simply no longer needs it, creates a vacuum. Into that void, his shadows rush. She becomes the projection screen for every woman who ever wounded him, rejected him, saw through him. But she is none of those women. She's simply the one who refuses to carry what isn't hers. And that is what makes her unforgettable. Because she is rare. She is not the kind who competes for love. She does not argue to be chosen. She understands something too many forget. Being chosen is not the prize being at peace is, and that's what damages him the most. Not her rejection, not even her indifference, but her peace. Because peace is the evidence that she is not waiting, that she is not seeking repair, that she does not need closure, explanation, or apology. Her energy is no longer invested in decoding him. She is turned inward, and in doing so, she has reclaimed what was always hers, her own worth. Men who are used to being chased feel displaced when they are met with detachment. But this isn't apathy, it's awakening. And once a woman awakens, there is no turning back. No pretending she doesn't see what she sees. No convincing her that she imagined the coldness in his avoidance or the emptiness behind his charm. She has crossed the threshold into self-trust, and that terrifies him. Because now, she doesn't need him to validate her experience. She doesn't need him to explain why he disappeared, why he couldn't show up, why he blamed her softness for his retreat. She understands the dance of projection now. She knows that what he feared in her was what he buried in himself. And still, she offered grace. She waited, once not in desperation, but in hope. Hope that he would see the potential she sensed beneath the surface. Hope that he would choose his healing over his defense mechanisms. Hope that he would meet her in presence, in soul, in truth. But hope can only live so long in exile. So she left, not with rage, but with reverence. Because a woman this attuned does not sever without sacred thought. She doesn't ghost. She grieves. She blesses the connection, thanks it for the lessons, and then vanishes from the spaces where her energy was not honored. He will search for her energy in others. He may even believe he has moved on. But it is not her he is chasing. It is the reflection she once offered, the image of himself he glimpsed in her presence, the deeper self she called forth, the one he wasn't ready to become. That is the tragedy of the ego. It wants transcendence, but not transformation. It wants the woman who awakens its soul, but not the death required to keep her. Because loving a woman like this demands that he lose everything that is false within him. The bravado, the emotional aloofness, the story that he is safer behind walls than in vulnerability. It requires that he descend into himself, that he confront the boy still hiding in the man's skin, that he take responsibility for his own evolution. She doesn't demand it. She doesn't even ask, but her very being insists on it. She is the threshold between his current self and his potential. And if he cannot cross it, he will resent her because she saw what he could be. And she loved him there, not for what he gave her, but for the soul she sensed behind the scars. That kind of love either liberates or it destroys. There are men who say, she broke me. But what they really mean is, she revealed me, revealed the hollowness beneath the arrogance, revealed the fear beneath the detachment, revealed the boy inside the man who still doesn't know how to be held without flinching. And this revelation, this sudden mirror held to the unconscious, does not happen with every woman. It only happens with the ones who do not mold themselves for his comfort. She is not performative. She is not decorative. She is not there to soothe the noise in his mind while silencing her own voice. She is the flame, and flames do not apologize for their heat. Carl Jung taught that our unlived life gathers in the unconscious as shadow. The parts of ourselves we deny, abandon, or suppress, those become ghosts in our psyche. And when he meets her, the woman he cannot impress, possess, or predict, those ghosts rise. He doesn't know why he feels both drawn to her and terrified by her. He doesn't understand why her presence feels like home and threat in the same breath. But the psyche knows. The psyche remembers that this kind of woman does not let the mask live. She stirs the soul, not the surface. She whispers to the wounds he thought were buried. And she does it not through force, but through being. She sees the soul before the strategy. And for a man who has survived by strategy, this is dismantling. Because for the first time, charm doesn't work, distance doesn't protect, control doesn't earn closeness. She doesn't need to be convinced, she needs to be met, not just with words, but with presence, with integrity, with emotional courage. And so the ego reacts. It calls her difficult, it calls her demanding, it calls her delusional. But none of that is true. She simply requires depth. She calls for the man beneath the boy, the truth beneath the narrative, the soul beneath the structure. And if he cannot meet her there, she does not punish him. She vanishes. This kind of vanishing is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of clarity. She does not linger where she is asked to become smaller. She does not remain where she must dim her wisdom to feel wanted. She walks, not because she lacks love, but because she refuses to abandon herself in its name. And that walk, that silent, resolute departure is what haunts him. He may replay the conversations. He may reanalyze her pauses, her glances, her last message. But the ache is not in the words. It's in what was not said, in the presence that once held him and now is absent, in the realization that her love was never desperate. It was sacred. She did not give it recklessly. She offered it like incense burning gently, rising upward, touching the unseen. And now that it's gone, he begins to understand he was never entitled to it. Herein lies the ego's collapse. He thought he had time. He thought her patience was endless. He mistook her softness for permission. But she was never naive. She was choosing him every day, from her wholeness, from her freedom, from her divine feminine intelligence that sensed his potential even when he didn't. She wasn't asking for perfection, only presence. She wasn't seeking fantasy, only reciprocity. And when that could not be offered, not because he was incapable, but because he was unwilling, she did not argue. She did not beg. She simply stepped out of the dynamic and back into her power. Now he sits with silence, with the echo of what could have been, with the understanding that some women do not circle back, that not all love waits. There is something uniquely painful in realizing that the door is not locked, but it is no longer open, that she holds no anger, only distance, that she wishes him well from afar, that her life now blooms in the places he once neglected, and he sees her, perhaps online, perhaps only in dreams, and there's a different kind of beauty in her now, not the beauty of longing, the beauty of liberation. She no longer desires to be understood. She has chosen to be free. There is no greater torment for the ego than to witness the flourishing of the one it could not contain. She does not punish him with new love, flaunted in his face. She does not retaliate with silence heavy with guilt. No, her revenge, if it could be called that, is far more disarming. She becomes more of herself. While he cycles through comparisons, attempting to replace what was never ordinary to begin with, she no longer waits. She no longer watches. The rope between them has fallen slack. There is no tension left to pull on. And this, for a man who thrives on emotional gravity, is devastating. Carl Jung warned of this. The psychic crisis that occurs when the masculine self clings to false identity and is confronted by the feminine as soul, not object. She was never meant to stroke his ego. She was meant to rupture it, and through that rupture, initiate him into depth. But initiation requires surrender, and the ego never surrenders willingly. So he resists, projects, blames. He might say, she's too intense, or she expected too much. But beneath the bravado, there is only one truth. He was not ready to be met by her gaze, a gaze that sees not the image he curates, but the man he could become. That kind of woman is not a romantic partner. She is a threshold, and he stood before it, but did not cross. Perhaps he was afraid. Perhaps he believed he had time. Perhaps he thought she would always be there, orbiting, waiting, interpreting his wounds as complexity rather than cowardice. But she is not like the rest. She does not confuse trauma for depth. She does not mistake detachment for mystery. She does not equate mixed signals with love. She has walked through her own shadows. She has faced the parts of herself that longed for rescue, that clung to unavailable men, that begged to be seen, and she has burned them, not in bitterness, but in rebirth. She does not wait for a man to choose her. She chooses herself, relentlessly, and that choice breaks the spell. Because the spell was never love, it was performance, a dance where she dimmed, doubted, or delayed her needs to fit into a role he could manage. But now, that role is discarded, and with it, the illusion of safety he once felt. Now, he is alone with himself, and in that aloneness, the questions come, the ones he buried beneath conquest, avoidance, pride. Why did I feel unworthy of her gaze? Why couldn't I let her love soften me? Why did I run from the very thing I claim to want? The answers don't come easily. Jung called this process the encounter with the shadow, the painful descent into all the parts of the psyche exiled by ego, the arrogance, the fear, the boyish helplessness that hid behind manly ambition. He is not a villain, but he is unformed, and she, by refusing to stay small, revealed it. Her power was never in her voice, her body, or even her presence. Her power was in what she refused to compromise. That refusal is what made her dangerous and holy, because a woman who knows who she is cannot be manipulated, not by charm, not by silence, not even by love. She walks with the quiet knowledge that not every connection is meant to be completed. Some are meant to awaken, some are meant to initiate, and some are meant to break the mirror he's been worshiping, so he might finally look beyond it. Yes, he will remember her, not because she begged, or performed, or stayed, but because she did none of those things, because she loved him while being whole, because she saw him, not through a lens of lack, but of potential, because she gave him the chance to rise. And when he didn't, she let him fall, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. He was not ready, and she no longer waits for readiness. She is readiness. She is the invitation. She is the door. And now, the door is closed. There is a silence that follows her absence, but it is not the kind that fades. It deepens. It stretches into the spaces where his pride once stood, into the places where he thought certainty would protect him. It lingers not as noise, but as memory, a quiet haunting, because what she offered was not attention. It was presence, and presence, once felt, cannot be replaced. He will try. The ego always does. It looks for distractions dressed as affection, echoes of her in new names, new bodies, new stories. But none will hold the charge of what was lost, because none will see him through the eyes of a woman who does not flinch from truth. What he misses is not her body, or even her warmth. What he misses is the mirror she held up to his soul, and the man he might have become had he chosen to stay and see himself through her gaze. But he didn't, and now she walks alone, not in sorrow, but in sovereignty. She no longer desires to be the one who changes him. That was never the mission. Her love was not a contract for transformation. It was an offering, a moment in time when the gates of evolution were open and he was invited in. He refused, and so now she blooms beyond him. There is no trace of the woman who waited, who hoped, who questioned her worth. That woman died in the fire of unmet love. What stands now is a woman reborn, not in revenge, but in reverence. She reveres her own silence. She honors the intuition that whispered, "Leave." She trusts that whatever could not meet her was never hers to hold. Carl Jung understood this kind of death. He called it individuation, the sacred unraveling of false identities, the shedding of inherited illusions. And no one individuates more fiercely than a woman who once betrayed herself to be loved and finally stops. She no longer explains. She no longer seeks. She no longer fights battles that drain her soul. Because now she knows what damages the ego is often what saves the soul. He wanted admiration. She offered reflection. He wanted devotion. She offered invitation. He wanted control. She offered truth, and truth, for those not ready, always feels like loss. But for her, there is no loss, only release. She releases the fantasy of who he could have been. She releases the sorrow of what never became. She releases the ache of trying to be enough for someone who had not yet become enough for himself. And in that release, she becomes dangerous in a new way. Not because she is hard, but because she is whole. She now walks among the women who know, the ones who no longer tie their value to validation, the ones who have sat in the flames of heartbreak and emerged with skin like myth and eyes like thunderclouds, the ones who do not chase but choose. And when he sees her again, perhaps years later, perhaps only in memory he will feel it, that hollow ache, that strange longing, not for possession, but for redemption. But by then, she is already gone, not to another man, but into herself, into the life she was always meant to live before she tried to shrink for love, into the peace that comes when you no longer ask others to name your worth, into the sacred knowing that some love is meant only to awaken and not to stay. And so, she becomes legend, the kind of woman no man forgets, not because she was loud, but because she was true. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.